Episode 3 begins with Roxy dressed like a village girl, heading towards the entrance gate of Hart's residence. As she is about to open the gate, she is surprised by a call from Fate, who is busy cleaning the yard. Roxy is taken aback by the unexpected call, and she scowls as she turns towards Fate. Fate then apologizes, realizing he didn't recognize her because of her different attire. Fate continues by asking Roxy if she's going to the palace dressed like that. With a smile, she approaches Fate and whispers her intention to go to the city for a secret inspection. After sharing her purpose, she asks Fate not to tell anyone, and warns that if Haru finds out, he will scold her. Upon hearing Roxy's request, he shouts in agreement. Roxy, seeing Fate's outburst, stops him by placing her index finger on his lips, startling him and causing him to drop the broom he was holding. Fate picks up the broom, and not wanting to disturb Roxy, he goes back to work. However, as he walks away, Roxy pulls the collar of his shirt. She asks Fate to accompany her as her guard during the inspection. In a narrow alley, Roxy runs and calls out to Fate, who is following her. Fate responds to Roxy's call with a formal address. Greed, hearing this, then reprimands Fate. Roxy, too, scolds Fate. Greed then speaks to him, and Fate responds to Greed without realizing Roxy is right in front of him. This startles Roxy, and Fate, equally surprised, falls silent for a moment and tries to explain. After thinking for a moment, Roxy asks Fate to call her Lexi. Greed, who had been silent, guesses Fate's thoughts. Unable to control his words, he asks Fate to be quiet in front of Roxy. Roxy, unaware that Fate is talking to Greed, apologizes to Fate and promises to stay silent. Fate, taken aback, tries to explain that Roxy is not annoying. Upon hearing this explanation, Roxy forgives Fate. She then says she was just too excited about going together. These words make both of them blush. As they blush, Greed teases them. Fate, now getting emotional, takes Greed from his waist and tells him to be quiet. Seeing Fate getting emotional with his weapon, Roxy stops him and won't allow Fate to mistreat his sword. Fate then stops his actions and apologizes to Roxy. After that, Roxy mentioned that she had never seen Fate's sword before. Upon hearing this, Fate started to contemplate his situation and didn't want Roxy to find out about his gluttony ability. While Fate was lost in thought, he accidentally dropped his sword, and Roxy quickly caught it. She then asked for permission to examine the sword as she unsheathed her own. After a moment of examining the sword, she returned it to Fate, saying that it could be good with a little repair, and she would show it to the family blacksmith of the Hearts. Roxy then invited Fate to continue their inspection. As they walked, Fate felt grateful that Greed could be polished. Greed then asked Fate to be quiet because he was savoring the pleasant scent of Roxy. Upon hearing Greed's remark, Fate raised Greed and was about to throw it. At the same time, Roxy called out to him and asked him to hurry as she ran out of the narrow alley. Once Roxy and Fate had exited the alley, they found themselves in the market with people gathered in front of them. Roxy, who was walking, stopped when she saw some good grapes. The seller then gave her a few to taste and offered some to Fate to try as well. The delicious taste of the grapes made Fate exclaim, and Roxy responded that they were grown in her home. She unintentionally revealed this, surprising the shopkeeper. Fate, wanting to protect Roxy's identity, took Greed's advice and explained that one of his relatives worked for the Hart family. After hearing this explanation, the fruit seller left them both. On the other hand, they both felt relieved, and Roxy praised Fate. As they were conversing, a knight arrived, causing the people to step aside and make way for the Holy Knight. Ever since Lord Mason passed away, the Holy Knights had been causing trouble, even the lowest ranking among them. As one of the Holy Knights was walking, he was startled by the sound of Fate's growling stomach, indicating his hunger. This led the Holy Knight to approach him. Fate, not wanting to engage in a conflict, quickly knelt down and apologized. The Holy Knight, not hearing his apology, intended to step on Fate's head. Before the Holy Knight's foot could make contact with Fate's head, he was stopped by a shout from Roxy. The Holy Knight found her face somewhat familiar, and with people around mentioning her name, Roxy lowered her head. Greed then suggested to Fate to pretend to be her lover and get closer so that no one would think he was Roxy. Fate repeated Greed's advice loudly, and Roxy overheard it. Upon hearing that, Roxy then grabbed Fate's arm and pretended to be his lover. They acted as a couple and left the confused Holy Knight standing there. While running, Roxy continued to hold Fate's hand and hid behind a wall in a narrow alley. Because Roxy was so close to him, Fate could read her thoughts, which made him blush, and he then released her hand. Roxy was slightly surprised, and to cover it up, she invited Fate to continue their inspection. Fate sighed and complained that escorting Roxy was challenging for him. Roxy, standing in front of a gem store, was attracted to the gems on display. In addition to gems, there were gemstones with unknown contents. Greed suggested using his identification ability to find the best gemstone. At the same time, Fate saw Roxy, who was captivated by the gem in her hand. The gem seller then offered Fate a discount if he wanted to buy her a gift. Roxy placed the gem back and left the seller behind. They both continued their inspection, and Roxy asked Fate if he had any friends among the active soldiers because she wanted to ask them something. At the same time, an adventurer was talking about the unnatural deaths of goblins, which seemed to be the work of roaming monsters. They also discussed the orphanage that had received donations from the Goblin King's ear. Roxy, upon hearing this, asked the adventurer to inform her and inquire about the roaming monsters. However, the adventurers refused and suggested asking the soldiers. Roxy then asked Fate to take her to the gathering place of the soldiers. She wanted to investigate the roaming monsters around the capital. Realizing this, Fate was surprised because the roaming monster was actually himself. Fate and Roxy then visited a small bar in the corner of the town. The bar owner was surprised to see Fate still alive. Fate sat in his usual spot and introduced Roxy as Lexi to the owner. The barkeeper praised Fate for getting a new job and a girlfriend, but Fate quickly denied it. Roxy accidentally broke a cup she was holding, blushing as she apologized to the bar owner. Seeing this, greed teased Fate, causing him to blush and grip the cup tightly. Their orders were placed on the table as the bar owner talked about the circulating rumors, where a soldier had gone hunting and found a pile of goblin corpses with intact ears. Roxy, upon hearing the story, concluded that it was the work of the roaming monsters migrating to another area. While they discussed the rumor, Fate's acquaintance, Mr. Ad, arrived at the bar and mistook Fate for a ghost. When they resumed their conversation, other customers arrived, namely adventurers, who ordered food and drinks. He joined the discussion and mentioned that the roaming monster was a lich. This prompted the Holy Knights to take immediate action. One of the adventurers then approached Roxy and asked her to have fun with them. Feeling disrespected, Roxy used her powers and flung the adventurer away. She then revealed her true identity, surprising the adventurers, who immediately prostrated themselves, apologizing and offering their money to her. Roxy declined their money. She felt embarrassed and regretful at the same time because the people they protected were now looking at the Holy Knights with fear. The Holy Knights' mission was to protect the community. She had a dream like her father's, where everyone could laugh together regardless of their status. The scene shifted to Fate, who had repaired his sword with Roxy's help. After finishing the sword repairs, Roxy thanked him because she could learn more about the roaming monsters thanks to him. At the same time, the knights from the Valoric noble family were forcing a young child to join them, claiming they were only taking a lost child into their protection. Seeing this, Roxy ordered Fate to rescue the child from Hado's grasp. After saving the child, Roxy told them that the child was her concern. She then asked why they hadn't informed her about the hunt for the roaming monsters. They thought Roxy's mind was preoccupied with her father's departure, so they didn't tell her. Then they bid farewell to Fate and Roxy, along with the child they had rescued. Afterward, they helped the child reunite with his mother. While accompanying the child, Roxy remembered her own past when she was lost after her father's death and moved to the capital. She was also curious about the Holy Knight who had helped her back then. As evening approached, they still hadn't found the child's mother. When the child cried, a woman's voice was heard, and it turned out to be the child's mother. The child ran to his mother, and they thanked Roxy and Fate. With a happy look, Roxy watched the child and his mother as they left. Fate, seeing Roxy's expression, was captivated by her, and a gust of wind made her even more graceful. However, while he was gazing at her, Roxy noticed and made Fate nervous. She then reminded him that they had to return. Upon arriving home, they were scolded by Haru. Fate's life had changed, and he hoped that it would stay that way forever. However, at the same time, he considered hunting monsters without Roxy's knowledge. The next day, he went to the market alone and bought a special mask. After getting the mask, he purchased gemstone ore. Fate then gave the gemstone ore to Roxy as a token of gratitude for changing his life. Roxy happily accepted the gemstone ore and immediately cracked it open with her hands. A blue gemstone emerged from the ore, and Roxy liked it. As a gesture of gratitude, Roxy then made another offer. However, Fate stubbornly refused it, even though he argued with greed. Meanwhile, the Holy Knight members were gathering without Roxy, holding a meeting to retaliate against Gallia.